Some viewers may find the following video disturbing. Viewer discretion is advised.
All right, everyone. Thank you for tuning into the Lone Wolf Podcast. I have a good friend of the channel. He's on for the first time. I've been on his show multiple times in the past. Reed Coverdale, the Naturalist Capitalist. You can find him under the Naturalist Capitalist on YouTube. You can find him over on Twitter. I believe it's Naturalist Capitalist over there. But you will have the link to his Twitter handle down in the description box below. How are you doing tonight, Reed? How's the trucking life going?
I'm doing good. I moved my heaviest load so far this week. I'm Reed Coverdale on Twitter, by the way. Okay. But yeah, you can find me there. So
yeah, I couldn't remember if it was at the Naturalist Capitalist or at Reed Coverdale. But yeah, you know, Reed sent me over the picture. He moved like some massive bulldozer or something out west this week. So Reed's another guy like myself, but I don't envy his job at all. We're both blue collar guys. But, you know, he's got a rough life out there driving in the roads every day. So, you know, send all your wishes over to him because that's a tough job for sure. But, Reed, you know, I'm independent. And, you know, it's kind of says within your name, the Naturalist Capitalist. And so I figured a good thing we could start talking about today is a lot of the misconceptions that a lot of people have in today's world about what capitalism really is. I think what people see in the world around them, and you've got a lot of people out there, more on the left, and especially the people like the Caleb Maupins and all that, who tell you that, no, this is capitalism, that what you see in the United States is capitalism. And when someone gives a pushback, they say, well, this is what capitalism always leads to. And so because you see a system where the rich constantly get richer and the poor get poorer, you know, they say it seems like it's all rigged. A lot of people think that capitalism is a complete failure. Give us your pushback on that. I've given some of my takes on the channel before, but I want to get this from a pure libertarian point of view. What is capitalism to you, and why is what we see today not real capitalism?
Yeah, so I wouldn't say that capitalism is the only thing that this has happened with. I mean, we've bastardized every term in the book. I mean, what does conservative mean now? Or what does progressive mean? You know, like, I mean, none of these words mean anything anymore. But I think you have to have terms that mean something so that we can have conversations. So, you know, I stick with original meanings of terms, because if you try to evolve with the culture, you're never going to have a term you can stick with, because the terms keep getting diluted and, you know, dismissed and deleted or whatever. So I proudly display the name right on my channel. So capitalism, it really just comes down to property rights. It just means that you own your own property and no one else has a say to it. And if you're going to transfer property, it has to be through transactions. So, right. I mean, that really is the entire thing right there. That's how it works. So you can see how that flies blatantly in the face of everything that goes on in today's economy. There is no private ownership of really anything. I mean, even if you're a billionaire who's getting subsidized by the government, you still don't really privately own all your possessions. You're still paying taxes on them. I mean, if you stop paying taxes, your property gets seized from you. Yep. Your property is taken from you and redistributed, often upwards to people who don't need it, to banks, to Wall Street, to the military, to foreign countries when you're locked in your house. I mean, it's crazy. So what we have now is really fascism. It's, you know, sort of quasi-private ownership of business with extreme government regulation, which is a merger of corporations and government, which is the original definition of fascism. So, you know, it's really sort of a mix of capitalism and socialism, because you have the sort of private ownership that still kind of exists, but then you also have the government redistribution of wealth going on. And it would be incredibly unfair for me to characterize the economy we live under as socialism, because I know that that's not what socialists are advocating for. But they continue to call this a capitalist economy when it's not. So I would appreciate it if they would address me the way I address them, with the terms that I define, just like I talk to them with the terms they define. This is not a free market capitalist economy by any means. It's so overregulated.
Right.
And the freedom of the market is pretty much non-existent. It's so manipulated by the Federal Reserve, by banks, by adjusting interest rates way below where they should be. So yeah, it's not a free market capitalist economy at all. Free market capitalist economy would be one where you have complete ownership over your property. And if you're going to transfer it, it's going to be through a transaction, not through seizure by the state, or, controlled seizure by the state, instrumented by corporations or whoever's trying to get an upper leg on you. That would be an actual capitalist economy.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. And I think one of a couple of distinctions I'm going to make here and then get your take on some of this. But, a lot of times when you talk to people who, as they currently sit, have a bad opinion of capitalism, again, they always go to lumping, well, corporatism and capitalism, they go hand in hand. One feeds into the other. Okay. But if you start to touch on communism or maybe socialism, and you start talking about where things went wrong in those cases, the Soviet Union, the start of communist China under Mao, and they'll tell you, oh, well, this and this contributed and the wrong people took power and bad things happened. Okay, so give that same, credibility to this side of it. You're saying that what happened in those cases are not what it was supposed to be, yet you're telling us this is the only way capitalism can go. It's just not true, because here's what happens. Anything can be corrupted. Any system can be corrupted. I know this is something that a lot of people I've kind of debated in the past who lean more socialist to communist don't agree with, but there is a natural greed somewhere in man. I think probably comes from survival of the fittest, a very primate type instinct where you're trying to protect more for yourself. And I don't care what economic theory you impose. It's, as Joe Rogan has referred to it as, it's leftover monkey shit. Okay. We've got that in our DNA to try to take more for our own well-being. And a lot of people, as I've said, they don't even necessarily realize what they're doing could be per se greedy. That's why you've had the big chains. Like you hear a lot of people fuss about people like Walmart or Amazon. And I think there's a case to be made there, but understand, could Walmart or Amazon have been so successful if people weren't greedy and looked at the situation and said, now, I could go out when I go shopping today, not necessarily today, but I'm talking 20, 30 years ago here. Maybe when I go out, I make 6 trips because there's local business all around me. And these people live amongst my community. So I would be in turn helping my neighbor, as opposed to going to that fancy chain store and giving my business to a millionaire, billionaire who doesn't live amongst my community, has no, empathy to what we go through here. But people didn't look at it that way. A few did. But most people said, oh, one-stop shop, more convenient for me. Here's where I'm going to go. Oh, a little bit lower price because they've got more money. They can take a little bit more of a hit. Yeah, I'll go give my business over here because it's more convenient for me. Okay. Whether people know it or not, that's a greed. And so that's why any system can be corrupted, because people are not perfect. That goes for capitalism, communism, socialism. And so ideally, and this has been my take, I think there needs to be, you need to let the free market be the free market, and that the role of government should have only been to make sure that we keep a level playing field and to try to keep corruption from taking over. If someone tries to become too powerful to crush the market and monopolize so you can't have good competition anymore, the government should take the Teddy Roosevelt approach, come in and bust that back up and say, no, we need the competition for the good of the consumer. Okay. So what's happened is, unfortunately, that went off the rails. The government's gotten their hooks in on everything. they warp it. And of course, the people who have the money and the power, they then donate to the government to make sure that it continues to be tilted more and more in their favor, and more that so no one has a chance to open up and really try to compete against them. That's where I've kind of set on all this. What do you say to things like that?
So I think whether you're talking about communism or capitalism, the common denominator of corruption is government. Like, I mean, so I think we can. I have, a year ago, I probably would have agreed with you a little bit more, that the government is just supposed to be a referee. Basically, they're not supposed to have their hands on the scales at all. They're just supposed to be there to make sure everyone's following the rules. And if you step out of line, you get punished. But what I've realized is that is actually the idealistic position, to think that the government is going to remain as nothing other than a referee. Like, there's nothing more utopian than being a minarchist, which means you believe in limited government. I mean, it's like believing in a limited tumor inside your brain or something, like, oh, it'll be fine. It's not going to get bigger or whatever. But, that's the common denominator I see with all these systems. I was in a debate last week, and I told the guy that I actually, my problem with socialism is when it is mandatory. If you want to join a cooperative or start a commune with your friends or whatever, like, as long as you're doing it voluntarily, I don't care. If you guys don't want to own any private property and you want to share everything you have, go for it. Just don't force me to do it. Once you get government involved in the economy, I mean, it just falls apart. And I think that's been obvious throughout the history of this country. You mentioned Teddy Roosevelt breaking up a lot of those big businesses. Those big businesses actually got so big because after the Civil War, the United States government started subsidizing all these big companies. Reconstruction, really screwed over the southern states and built up a lot of big business in the northern states. There were lots of federal land grabs that took place. And you don't really learn that in school. In school, you learn, capitalism went out of control and we had to step in and, put in these regulations. And it's like, well, that's not really what happened. Like, there was a big hand that the federal government had in that. So, I mean, I'm a radical when it comes to government. I mean, I'm an anarchist at this point. I don't believe in the validity of government. I think that it's illegitimate. The idea of laws and democracy, and this would be a whole different subject. I don't want to go down a rabbit trail, but just because 51% of the people in a room decide something and sign some piece of paper that becomes codified into law, I don't buy that as legitimate anymore. I mean, I don't know why I used to, but especially with what you see them pass into law these days, it's like, what? Like, why are we listening to you? So when it comes to all this stuff, like, whether it's big banks surviving when they shouldn't, big businesses getting bailouts when they've been irresponsible, it all ties back to government. And so, at this point, I just say, just get the government out of it completely. Like, I don't want the government interfering in the economy at all, regardless of what good intentions some progressives might have. I would ask them, like, with what you've seen the government do over the last year, do you really expect it to, institute whatever it is you want? UBI, Medicare for all, any of those things. Like, I mean, even your most progressive legislators folded and voted for these corporate bailouts, and they wouldn't even stand by on the force the vote thing a few months ago. So do you really trust these people to look out for you? So when it comes to government involvement at this point, I'm pretty much just hands off. Like, I think that pretty much everything evil that's going on is facilitated by the government. Maybe the corporations are pushing the buttons and, they obviously are gaining from it, but without the government, they wouldn't have the, the power that they do. They would be at the mercy of their consumers, and they're not, because sometimes it's illegal for there to be competition, or they've just been made so big with, certain regulations or whatever, that there is no competition anymore. So yeah, I'm pretty much. I mean, when they say laissez-faire, a lot of people say that and they don't really mean it. I mean it at this point, and that's it goes well with my name. Like I think it's pretty natural if you just let the market work instead of trying to manipulate it. Things are going to be better. They're not going to be perfect. People shouldn't lie. The market isn't perfect. It's not like we're all going to live in harmony and there's not going to be any fraud and there won't be any economic upheaval. But I think it would be way better than what we've been dealing with.
Yeah, and me and you kind of have slight different take. I could see where you're coming from on where you see the government being the complete problem there, just because I think the one thing we're going to have in common on that for sure is that the current government that we have today, a lot of these ideas that you get the progressives and the people on the left, like, oh, Medicare for all. You really think they're going to be able to run it efficiently if they put it in place? Like, let's be honest. Social Security's become a complete disaster. The VA has tons of problems. The DMV is a hassle. I mean, look at all the government institutions that they're already running today, and can't keep it straight. How do you think it's going to be any different if you just add more and more to it? The military industrial complex, I guess that'd be another good example of government giving out, I guess, socialism just to the military in this point. And going all the way back to 2000, I think, and fitting to bring this up because unfortunately we had the terrible, terrible, sad news that Donald Rumsfeld passed away. But if you remember all the way back the day before 9/11, you had this guy saying that the Pentagon couldn't track trillions of dollars in military spending. And that was before we started the war on terror. Okay. So because these things came around, God knows how much spending they can't track for now. This government could not run these programs. And so, I think there's a lot of Americans out there today who are starting to look at it and say that, as you point out, the government is the problem here. The only reason that I say we probably differ just a little bit is because there's only going to be one or two ways of fixing that system. One is very, very ugly, which is it burns down entirely. It turns into like revolution. It burns to the ground, and the people have to build it back up somehow from scratch. And then you got to question whose ideology winds up taking hold. And me personally, I think a lot of damage in that department's been done through mainstream media and whatnot. A lot of people, as we're already talking about, have a lot of misconceptions about what true capitalism is. What kind of system would they put in place if it's left up to just, public opinion, how we're going to rebuild this? I think I know which way society is going to push toward, and I don't know how comfortable I am in that. And so that's why I say, in this case, the government has caused a lot of problems. My approach would be we need the government long enough to fix that. That's why I push the third party stuff, trying to get more people elected, get rid of the duopoly. We've got to change some things to get the system back on track at least. And then if we can get there, then let this thing go. Let this thing go. Let the free market finally be the free market. Stop all these endless wars. Stop interfering, putting a thumb on the scale for certain businesses, because that does nothing but, make the business believe I can do whatever I want. I can pay whatever I want. I can charge whatever I want. And if my sales go down and I'm going into the red, I'm too big to fail, and the government's just going to bail me out, and the taxpayers get burdened. So yeah, that's kind of where I look at it as I don't like the government being heavily involved in this stuff anyway, just because it's so terrible. And I certainly don't think that the current government could fix the system. My only probably difference would just be I think we've got to have something to put it back on track. If nothing does, then the system's eventually going to burn down, and then you don't know what you're going to get out of it. But what do you say to that?
So I'm a big proponent of secession, and that's been a recent evolution this year. After they started rolling out this idea for a domestic terror bill because of what happened on January 6th, That was kind of just I don't know, that was the end for me. There was that bill that we passed right before Christmas that almost nobody talked about. Everyone was talking about other shit, and this $2.4 trillion bill that goes to Saudi Arabia and Sudan and Israel and all these other countries. Well, and then right after that we have this domestic terror bill being rolled out or whatever. I was like, okay, I'm done. And then I started talking to anarchists, started talking with Magnus and Kerry Wedler and, a bunch of different other people. And I just realized this is all propaganda that we need to be one state. Why do all 50 states need to be under one centralized government? We could even still be the United States of America without a centralized government. If we wanted to be, we could still have, we don't have to disassociate with each other. We can still trade with each other, still travel in between states. But why do we need this big overarching federal government controlling everything when you have so many different cultures, so many different economies? I mean, even if you live in a state like California or New York, you're probably sympathetic toward breakup if you're a conservative in California, or if you're a liberal living in Tucson, Arizona, where Phoenix controls everything that goes on in your state. If you want to legalize, I think they finally did legalize weed there this last year, but they were fighting that forever in Tucson, Arizona, because Phoenix controlled the legislature and they didn't want to legalize weed. Nothing they could do about it. The same with California. If you're living out in the woods, if you're a redneck gun-toting guy out in the woods, Los Angeles and San Francisco, they run your life. And then if you live in New York, it's Manhattan and Brooklyn and, New York City. I don't know, you're just controlled by people who don't live in your neighborhood, who don't know your lifestyle. I'm at that point with the government in the United States. I would like to see some form of balkanization, some form of secession or returning to the 10th Amendment, just something. And I don't think it has to be a war. I think that's propaganda that we've been fed, that it's going to be a conflict if that happens. I don't think it has to be. I think if Texas wants to secede, we should just let them secede. And then if this greater Idaho thing happens or whatever, I think Florida's talked about seceding. Screw it. I mean, let it happen. And I am liking some of the moves that a lot of states are making. They're nullifying gun laws in all their states, federal gun laws. They're saying no ATF agents are allowed in here. You have sanctuary states for immigrants. You got, you got all sorts of stuff going on. Some states are starting to push for the defend the guard legislation that won't let the military deploy the National Guard unless war is actually declared. Right. I want to see a progression in that direction. I'd like to see income tax sanctuary states, stuff like that. The stuff that really puts the screws to the federal government. Because I think the most likely course to put us into a conflict is keeping on our current course, just having this giant government over so many people that hate each other and don't have respect for each other's lifestyles and are all trying to control each other. This control has to die. We don't need to control people around the country. We need to just let people live and let people do what they want, as long as they're not hurting other people. So I guess that's how I look at that. I'm not sure that it has to go toward autocracy or chaos. I think that there is a peaceful solution, and we just need to start talking about it, because secession is a dirty word. You're almost called a racist if you want secession. Even though it has nothing to do with the previous Civil War or whatever. If you believe in secession, you're a traitor. You hate your country. You're selfish. It's just not true. If you have a toxic relationship, the best thing you can do is break up. I think that's what the United States needs to do.
Yeah, it's propaganda tools they try to capitalize on that patriotism as to why you can't question the government. And I'll say this, if anything sums up just how lopsided modern government in the United States is, and how, as I grew up hearing in the South, they try to have their cake and eat it too. It's the fact that, as you pointed out, you've got Joe Biden pushing this domestic terror thing. So they say what happened on January 6th was domestic terrorism, and that it was a threat to democracy and a threat to our republic, and blah blah blah. You've heard how mainstream media and the Democrats and even certain Republicans have framed this thing, but yet
some libertarians too.
Unfortunately, but
yeah.
But then he comes out a little over a week ago, pushing back on the Second Amendment and says, "Oh, if you think the Second Amendment does you any good to defend yourself from tyrannical government, you got to have F-15 fighter jets and nuclear warheads." Joe, I don't recall anyone flying planes in on January 6th. I don't recall any nuclear missiles even being rolled out of a, bunker or cellar or, silo or whatever for January 6th. And yet
the secret
I really don't even recall seeing that many guns on January 6th. Yet that
got a
was
buffalo headdress. That's the secret weapon. That's
I guess that what was going to happen was, if someone pissed him off, he was going to gore him like it was a bullfight, but it's just the point that was a threat, but we got to have this to be a threat. It makes no sense. And unfortunately, it's saddening, but there's so many people out there who don't pay attention to that double standard. The mainstream media said it was a threat, and so everyone goes, "Oh well, must have been a threat." And then Joe Biden comes out and he says, "Hey, our military's armed to the teeth. If you don't have what we have, you can't compete." And there, I guess, is something to that statement. But the fact is, you just said a couple of months ago that a bunch of rowdy red hat wearing MAGA people who were just, protesting and pushing through doors, but weren't firing rockets at the place, nearly took down democracy. So it's backwards. And I think that's what a big part of our problem is as society, is that we've got too many people who just believe what the mainstream media, left or right wing, tells you. No one's doing enough of their own research, their own independent thinking. And so I think that in the stance of like capitalism, for example, they don't do their own research into it. They don't understand that, unfortunately, the thing that is the best for a consumer society. See, ironically enough, a lot of the people, I think Tom McDonald did actually a pretty good job of pointing this out. How many people complain about the capitalist system and say they want socialism or communism while they tweet from an iPhone and sip on Starbucks?
Yeah.
What are you using? You're partaking in a system that has things for consumers, right? And so this idea of this shared property and everything like that, I don't find it coincidental, Reed, that you hear more and more of this idea like, oh, we should just all have joint ownership. No one actually owns real private property. There's more and more people going down that path, while at the same time, the government, who, as we know, is right now controlling the narrative in a lot of ways, what the status quo wants, mainstream media repeats, they indoctrinate to get the government their votes or whatever. They're seizing more and more private property. They're putting their thumb on the scale more and more ways where guys like me or you would lose our home. And then companies like BlackRock come in and buy up all the property, and then it becomes theirs. Lumber, I think, is starting to go back down, but for a while there, because of the whole COVID situation, people were losing their homes, getting kicked out. Their homes are being seized. There's a lot of new homes, which this makes zero sense to me. If I was a businessman, right, and the country was going through a hard time, I don't know how things look out there where you're at, but in South Carolina, I've just in the upstate area saw probably close to about 10 whole neighborhoods now being built from scratch. They've bought up empty, vacant lots of land, and they're building houses, and they're not building spacious land houses. They're building that modern house that you've got the 2-story, the garage, and you've got a little portion of land that looks like something you would get in Queens, New York.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Not what you used to see in the South. People in the South used to have, like a yard, and you had to get out and cut grass. And I mean, cut grass, not go out there 5 minutes and you're done. But you're seeing a lot of these houses. Why in a pandemic? Any smart business person will say the cost of lumber is going up. The American consumer has got less money in their pocket right now. People are losing their homes. Why would it make good business sense for me to build new houses that are going to be valued higher in price because the lumber to build them has skyrocketed? I remember when they first put signs up, they said like homes starting at $160,000. That jumped within like a month and a half. They took the sign down. Now homes starting in the low $200,000.
Yeah.
So it jumped by a whole $40,000. You would look at that and say, that makes no sense to me why they're trying to do something like this. The only thing that I'm starting to kind of put two and two together on is that, again, the government's seizing more and more of this property. They're building these things. They're trying to drive costs up. They're getting all the ownership completely into the hands of the banks and the rich, who, of course, buy the politicians off.
Right.
And so then they're getting it to where there really is no private ownership anymore. And so ideally then, under the socialist concept, it's all joint ownership. It's like they're getting you used to that system, except it's not a joint ownership. It's still the rich and powerful have complete ownership. And so they're trying to get people turned against this idea of owning private property. And so in a way, I guess people don't really realize if it gets to that point, you're going to have a little more of the ideal system than you think, because the ideal system for a lot of these people is, well, let's just let the government own it or whatever, and we'll have our little house and our little portion of land, and we can all live equally and live in harmony. We can go outside and sing Kumbaya, at sunbreak in the morning, et cetera, et cetera. Well, it ain't going to be the government, but it's going to be the people who own the government that own your property. And unfortunately, what you haven't put two and two together on yet is that the people that own your government are the people you typically are complaining about. And that's what I think they're setting things up for. What do you say?
Yeah. So, I mean, there's a lot going on with the housing market. So first of all, you got a lot of people moving out of the cities, right? Like I don't know how many thousands of people left Los Angeles, New York City, all the lockdowns and everything. So that does contribute to the housing boom. That's a big reason that a lot of these new houses are going up. And then the increase in lumber prices has to do with a lot of things too. It has to do with shortages because people weren't working, in the fucking lumber mills and stuff. And then you also have inflation. And then you also have the demand for lumber for building all the houses. So that's driven lumber through the roof. And then the Federal Reserve kept interest rates basically at zero. So then the banks are lending out for almost nothing. So if anyone had money, even if they don't have enough money to buy a house, they were able to go buy a house. It's just like the 2008 housing crash all over again.
Yeah.
So, I mean, we are going to see a reset, like a housing reset. I don't know when, but it's going to be bad, and it's going to be worse than 2008. I mean, because people have less money than they did in 2008. The prices are more inflated than they were in 2008. It's going to be a disaster. But you're right. I mean, I think BlackRock is buying property at like 20% over set prices. They're purposefully driving the rates through the roof, because you're right. They want to own as much property as they can. And they are directly financed by the Federal Reserve. People don't realize that. Like, there's a direct link between BlackRock and the Federal Reserve. That's fascism again, just like straight up blatant fascism right there. While you were talking, I was thinking exactly what you said. Like, hey, this is turning into the socialist utopia where there's no private property anymore. The government owns everything.
Yep.
What I've always thought about tyrannical government is that they are going to make your life as pleasurable as possible, because if they make it miserable, then you're going to want to resist. If they can make it pleasurable, then you're going to accept it and you're actually going to desire it. So if they can successfully seize all this property and then they can institute some sort of universal basic income or something,
Right.
people will just be begging for it. And then if you're someone like me who says, hey, fuck this, I don't want this government control of everything, this is bad, you are evil. You're the evil guy for getting in the way and trying to, stop the benevolent government from saving its citizens. And we saw this to an extent with like the stimulus bills. I remember when Thomas Massey sort of held up the CARES Act a little bit there and said he wanted a recorded vote. Like, he was the enemy of the people. All the Republicans hated him. All the Democrats hated him. I mean, that is what the government is good at. They're good at, they're good at pitching themselves as though they are the benevolent caretakers who are really just there to help their citizens, and these greedy, angry, private ownership capitalists get in the way and try to stop it. And it's just bullshit. I mean, you see it, and I know Dave sees it, and other people see it, and it's bad and it's scary. But I think you're right that this push for communism and socialism that's been taking place in academia, it's not really for a socialist utopia. It does make sense that it's more for something like this. It was always set up to just kind of numb people's brains and, get them to accept a takeover through government and corporate power. And then, hey, as long as they're going to facilitate it and I'm not going to have to be responsible and I'm not going to own anything because owning things is evil, then I'm good with it. And I mean, it makes sense, man. It's scary, but
yeah, it's bad. And, me and Dave kind of hit on this point last time I had him on the show. We were talking about some of that whole critical race theory stuff. And we were talking about a lot of like the liberal Democrat type, but you point out the federal government as a whole does it. It's just you prominently hear how we're going to take care of your issues a lot on that scale from the Democrats more than Republicans, but they both have their own way of going about it. And the thing is, this is something that I pointed out, and this is my belief, is, slavery was put to an end. Jim Crow was put to an end. Federal government, as it stands right now, they're bought by the rich and the powerful. They've got to try to find a way to keep people from achieving wealth on their own, because the rich and powerful want to stay rich and powerful. They don't want competition. They want it more for themselves. And so they go to the politician and they say, hey, you take care of this because you're the one with the power and you make the laws and you can. We'll make sure you have hefty retirements. Your kids will go to private schools, et cetera, et cetera. Okay. So then they get bought off. They go into office. They rig the scales, rig the playing field. The rest is history. And it's what we see today. But here's the thing. They can't physically, unless they, as I said to Dave, pass a crime bill, they can't physically put the chains on you like they used to anymore. I'm not just talking about minorities. It goes for everybody pretty much at this point. Okay. Mm-hmm. They can't do that kind of stuff, except when you look at the issues of like police state and what they're doing with prisons. They can in that sense, but in the rest of the sense, they can't just put everyone in a prison. Okay. They still need people in the outside world to be, as what George Carlin described, the obedient workers. Okay. And they don't want people to get smart enough to figure out about that whole club that Carlin referred to. Right. So what they do is they talk about all these things. As you said, they rig a system to take everything away from you. And then they get mainstream media to give you a bunch of talking points. And by the end of it, it's like one of those shady infomercials on television that, or like a shady used car salesman. They've got you convinced that you're getting such a good deal because they're going to bargain it all back to you. Everything they took, we're just going to try to give back to you now.
Yeah.
Like for example, people were so ecstatic over getting a little bit of stimulus money back without realizing they already kind of took it from you in many cases through taxes. You're only getting a refund, really. So that you already had a lot of this money at some point in time. They just took it from you through taxes. But everyone's like, oh, thank God. Wow, ain't the federal government great? That they get people conditioned that way. Mm-hmm. And so it's not a physical chain they can put on you anymore, but it's a mental chain. They mentally use the news and other sources to control how people think about a situation. And then at the end of it, like you said, they come out while they've been wrestling in a pile of shit this entire time, but yet by the time mainstream media pulls their little stunts, they come out smelling like a rose.
Yeah.
To a lot of the people, and it explains how they've been able for years and years to get away without really being unseated from office. A lot of people could talk about the whole election integrity stuff, but I don't think you had any sort of real big concern on that 20, 30 years ago. I think that's why Perot had a pretty good run before he dropped out in 92. But of course, they learned a lesson from that. And so that's just my thing is that a lot of people think the federal government is very dumb. And they do give the impression a lot of times that they don't know what they're doing. It's a lot of old people who've been up there since the early 1800s. They're old. They're falling apart. They're on all kinds of medication. It's like a whole town full of Joe Bidens in a lot of cases, right? And a lot of people are like, oh, our government's such an embarrassment. And I fall in that camp too. I do think it's an embarrassment. But I don't think a lot of people realize those are just the figureheads, really. Those are the people who keep getting paid to just sit there and be an old relic to be a figurehead for the system. The real power sits more behind the scenes and just tells them what to do and just gives them orders, hands them some money, pays them off, and they get what they want done. And so you can't look at how dumb is our government really by looking at these old 70, 80-year-old people and saying, it's just a bunch of incompetence. It appears to be a lot of incompetence. There are really smart, conniving people behind the scenes. That's just their puppet. And as long as you're not paying attention to those strings and you just look at the puppet, you're going to be fooled. You don't realize just how bad they're rigging this system and screwing things over. And so that's important to realize, I think, in terms of like capitalism is what kind of a real America do you really want to live in? Because I believe in a concept where actions come with consequences. Every action has an equal and opposite reaction. So you should be held accountable for your decisions. So as a business owner, if you want to run your business shittily, you're going to go out of business.
Yep.
You're going to go out of business. If you want to do right by your workers as a business owner and the American consumer, and you run your business properly, and you can take care of the people who work for you, if people want to unionize to negotiate, I'm all for it. Okay. If you want to do things like that, more power to you. But the idea of just forcing, and this has been my whole argument all along, is to try to throw capitalism out for what America has become. I don't even think the people who want it realize what's going to happen, because America is a very consumer-based society. And if we can't even get people to understand to stop voting for the duopoly, imagine going to all these people who are so used to that Starbucks coffee and this and that and telling them, no, you really can't have this stuff anymore. It's going to be like culture shocks. We talk about don't shop at Amazon, don't shop at Walmart. I still adhere to that. But do you know how many people are going to be doing that?
Yeah.
And so when you start coming in trying to bust all that up, so many people are going to push back at that because they have fear of the unknown. They don't like that much of a change all at one time. They're going to push back at that. And then you will get tension. You will get conflict. And when you start trying to seize private property through mob force or whatever, because it's got to be shared, you are going to start provoking, in a lot of ways, civil war amongst a lot of people. What you're going to have are the people who never had anything in the first place, or people who might have had something but believe that sacrifice was for the greater good. And you're going to have a lot of people who've been living in a society that has conditioned them, work hard to have the things that you own. And I've got a mob outside my house saying it's not yours anymore, we're going to take it. And it ain't the government saying it either. It's just a mob full of people. That could go south very, very quickly. And so, to me, I think a system where we're going to say that actions don't come with consequences, it's all going to be a utopia. We all have shared ownership of businesses or houses or whatever. I think Gene Epstein did a real good job of pointing this kind of stuff out. You've got to have a business some autonomy to make their own decisions. They got to be able to look at what the consumer wants in a society like this and say, this is what we need to make for them. Whereas if it's just all up to people inside, I think he does a really good job of making the argument and pitting it or pushing it right back to the socialist communist argument and saying, how would you like to live in a system where the only way you're going to have access to birth control is if the company and all the people working there decide that's what we want to do and that's what we want to make?
Yeah.
Because that's something that a lot of consumers want in the United States today. The people don't want to pop out kids left and right, but they want to partake in the action of making a kid. So you might want to have some birth control, condoms or contraceptives, whatever, laying around. How would you like to live in a country where that's not going to be there for you unless the company decides we still want to make that or whatever? What if they decide they want to make something else instead? You're out of luck. So
yeah. I in my debate last week, I actually sort of made that point, and with YouTube channels, I was like, shouldn't a YouTube channel that's interesting be more successful than one where someone comes and just stares at the screen? So imagine if there were no market for art, if there were no market for movies, like if movies were all, they all got the same ratings and you had to enjoy them all the same amount, or if it was just the same movie produced every time and there was no testing to see what people wanted, that is capitalism right there. It's hierarchy. People, we've been told that hierarchy is wrong. I disagree. I mean, I think Jordan Peterson talks about this geniusly. Like, hierarchy is natural, and that doesn't mean that you should have undesirable people or something, or people should be living in the gutter or whatever. I mean, we should take care of people who need help, but it's just to prove that there are people who are going to be more successful than other people because they have better ideas, they're better workers, they're smarter, whatever it is. Like, that's going to happen. And if we try to eliminate that, that would be the dumbest thing we could ever do, because it actually kills the variety that we have as humans. It kills our individualism. It kills what's special about every one of us. Imagine if you weren't allowed to choose who your wife was, if you grew up in India or something, and it's just like, it's pre-chosen for you and you just have to go with it. I mean, it's terrible. Like, any point in life where there's something that is forced on us that we have no choice over, we don't appreciate that. So why would we want to do that with the economy? It makes no sense. I mean, everything else in life is favored through competition. Like, you have choices, you have other options you can choose. You go with the best one. That's what enriches your life. That's what makes your life interesting. So yeah, I mean, it's the same with the economy. And like I said, that doesn't mean that we shouldn't help people who are on the bottom. I just think that the government has, screwed that up royally. I'm a very generous person. I've helped a lot of people out. I think direct action, mutual aid, local food drives, things like that are much more effective than federal programs. I mean, and the other thing, I wanted to get into this a little bit. When it comes to the federal government and our monetary system, progressives should really remember that our monetary system is propped up by imperialism. It's propped up by the petrodollar, which is dependent on our alliance with Saudi Arabia.
Yep.
Which also is dependent on our alliance with Israel. And Israel and Saudi Arabia fuel a lot of the war on terrorism, because even though they hate each other, they have the same enemies. They hate Iran, so they like Al Qaeda. They don't like Assad. So they're all for us supporting terrorist organizations in the Middle East. And all of this ties back to our monetary policy. It keeps the dollar afloat because it's tied to the petrodollar through OPEC with Saudi Arabia. Right. So even if Medicare for all or UBI or whatever sounds good. Just remember that the dollar and the US monetary system is held up by bullets that kill children. So, it's just something good to keep in mind.
Yeah, in other words, the same way that we hear the argument today, this country was built off the sweat and blood of a black man, right? Because of the slave labor. A lot of this stuff with the way the current government's set up, you want to institute a lot of this stuff. It could be literally paid for by the lives and deaths of people in foreign countries because of what we're doing to keep everything afloat, as you pointed out.
Right.
But and that's going back just real quick here. What I was pointing out to me, I think that the concept of fair competition of people for the good of the consumer, that to me is really what the America I was always like. People might say it was propaganda, but it's that the idea that everybody could have a chance, everybody could have a choice, everybody could have freedom, right? And I think that embodies really real capitalism at the end of the day, and not a system where it is you have to conform and do the things that we want as a whole, and if you don't, you're an enemy of the entire system. That sort of stuff leads down slippery slopes. And that's where you got the crap in the past, like the gulags and all that crap, right? Because they're an enemy of the ideology. They must be punished because they're a threat to our entire cause over here. I would rather see a system where people have that chance, and I don't want to see the system where the government. I don't want to see corporatism, where the government's got their thumb on the scale to prevent all that competition. And I think that for all the people who have an issue with the Jeff Bezos of the world, with like the Walton families or the Bill Gates or all these different people, or with Big Pharma, instead of buying in to what a lot of talking heads and college professors are selling, look at the facts that you really have around you and do that deep dive. Really look at what real capitalism was supposed to be, like what me and you've sat down and done here today. And then look at and think about how these things you hear people like Richard Wolff or whatever, how are you really going to get that ball rolling and what could happen in the process? And then you tell me, well, it shouldn't happen the way it happened in the Soviet Union, or it shouldn't happen the way it happened under Mao in China. But then look at our society and tell me how you're going to avoid that kind of conflict where you're going to have to take people who don't want to conform and put them in the gulag by force because they're not going to go along with it. Okay. I don't really see how you get that ball rolling. And I certainly don't think that embodies American values. But instead of buying into what they're selling, we know the rich and powerful are corrupt. We know they're greedy. We know they're buying off politicians. So as you said about secession, and I know it's going to be harder to do now than it would have been if the people, who were the adults in the room when we were still probably kids had have done it. Yeah. Because Walmart didn't have that kind of power 30, 40 years ago. Right. I can still remember, I'm actually old enough, and I'm not that old, but I can remember when Walmart wasn't super centers. Mm-hmm. I can remember when Walmart was just a little Walmart. And of course, it's grown into these massive things over time, like everything, clothes, groceries, electronics. So it's going to be harder to do now because they've driven so much small business out. For the people who have limited means and limited income, finding that local business owner who's still out there somewhere might be harder to do. But I tell you, if you really want to try to do things to make some sort of a difference, if you've got flea markets in your area, go shop at flea markets. Yeah. You would be surprised at just how much stuff you can find at a flea market. And if you're the type that eats healthy and you eat fruits and vegetables, if you eat eggs, things like that, I got news for you. I don't know how they are everywhere else, but all of them in upstate South Carolina that are a good flea market, they sell produce. And these are local farmers, local business owners selling their products at a market. It's not on the Walmart shelf. And I got news for you. If you eat eggs, The eggs are twice the size of what you could get at Walmart, probably a fraction of the price. The vegetables, these people have put a lot of time and effort, and they have a good product at a good price. You'll be supporting a local business owner. You're helping out your community, and you're not giving your money back into the very system that you're complaining about. And so I think that a lot of it, we need to educate. If you really have a problem with this system, educate people more and more to do what they can and try to find every avenue that they can to spend that money amongst each other. The same way you talk about states seceding from the union to get states' rights back or whatever, secede from this corporatist union and spend your money where you think you can that'll make a difference and help invest back into your community. And then you're not giving it back to the millionaires and the billionaires. What do you say?
I couldn't agree with you more. And I work for a guy who I'm one of 4 employees at a heavy haul trucking company. So I work for a small business, and there's a ton of money flow within this business, when you're moving machines like we move. And it's very hard to stay afloat. Like, just one big fuck up and you can be out of business, so
Right.
And that's what a lot of people don't realize is you have all these, it's usually more left-wing politicians who are always wanting to pass this legislation to protect small businesses, and they make business so much harder for small businesses. Like this idea that everyone needs to go to school to get a CDL. Apparently that looks good on paper, but actually think about that for 5 seconds. Like, you have to pay $6,000 to get a CDL now, when previously, if you were a guy who didn't want to go to college, you'd be like, okay, I'll go get a truck. I'll go drive a truck. And, the drivers are worse now that schooling's required in a lot of states. They're terrible. Like they're so bad. I mean, they're definitely not getting better. So yeah, I mean, definitely, shop locally, work for a small business if you can. It's more gratifying, in my opinion, and you're helping your community. And don't give these politicians their stupid legislation. Like, fight against it. It's dumb. I mean, it impedes small businesses. I've seen, when I lived in New Hampshire, I saw line work businesses go under because they couldn't keep up with the regulations anymore. The safety regulations, the environmental regulations, they just couldn't keep up with it. They'd be a company with like 5 trucks or something, and they'd just go under and they'd give up. And a lot of them got bought out by big corporations, giant corporations that run dozens of companies. I mean, is that what you want? If you're a progressive, you want corporations buying up all these small businesses because they can't survive with all the regulations that are put in place? That's not what you want. So, and then obviously, if you're a libertarian or conservative, you don't want that either. Nobody wants that except for the corporations, so, try to just remember that dumb regulations hurt small businesses more than big businesses. Big businesses, they're just annoying. They'll just be like, oh, okay, that sucks, whatever, but we'll deal with it and we'll survive. Small businesses aren't the same way. And there's something. Oh yeah, I did want to say that capitalism and consumerism don't need to go hand in hand. Sometimes they can, but we are actually able to consume more than we should be able to right now because of the Federal Reserve and because of artificially low interest rates, which allows people to borrow at rates that they wouldn't be able to. I mean, the types of loans you can get approved for with the ridiculously small down payments you have now at like 2 or 3% interest rates, it's insane. I mean, in a free market economy, there's no way you'd be able to buy, an $80,000 car if you make 30 grand a year. No. But sometimes you can do that now, depending on, what type of deal you end up with. I mean, it's crazy. So, I mean, this is another thing for progressives. If you're upset about how much we're consuming, an actual capitalist economy would bring us back to a place where you actually have to have enough money to buy something. And you wouldn't have people who are doing payments on their boat and their motorcycle and their car and their house and their college loans and, everything else without actually owning a single thing, who go through their whole lives without ever owning anything, just doing payment after payment after payment, consuming way more than one person should. Going back to an actual free market capitalist society would actually entail that you need to have capital and the economy wouldn't be rigged to encourage you to spend, because that's what it is now. Like, you get all these tax breaks if you have kids, or if you have a house, or if you know, went to school. If you're a single guy who makes 80,000 a year, you're screwed. Like, you're not getting any tax breaks. If you save your money, it's getting inflated while sitting in the bank, and you're not getting anything for a return interest rate.
No.
You know, so there's no incentive to save at all. There's no incentive to own anything. The incentive is to rent and buy and do payments because you can. And that's what has encouraged us to consume way more than we should. So, I mean, and as I said in the beginning, it all ties back to government. You know, without the government, we couldn't do any of this. I mean, so that's the root of the problem.
Yeah, I want to touch on a couple of things there real quick before we wrap up here. But yeah, I got to bring this up. You brought up how drivers are worse today.
Yeah.
When I used to work at a warehouse over in Woodruff, South Carolina. We got a lot of 18-wheelers coming through, and I worked at like a truck gate. So I helped receive them in, check them out, things like that. And Swift. Now, Reed, you being a truck driver, I know you know the reputation of Swift. Okay.
Sure wish I
finished training.
Yeah.
Okay. Now, I've never been through CDL school, but my dad was a truck driver. And so when I was a kid, I went on trips and stuff with him. So I know what tandems are. I know what the fifth wheel is, et cetera, et cetera. I know how you have to slide the tandems. So when you get to the warehouse, it was standard procedure. You had to slide your tandems on the trailer to the rear. They did not let the yard dogs, or spotters, as some people call them, that switch the trailers around. They didn't let them touch the tandems on the site. So you had to slide your tandems to the rear. The reason that it had to be done, they needed the tires under the back end for when it got to the dock, so it supported the forklift coming on and off. Okay.
Right.
Safety concern. So I tell the Swift driver, I'm like, I need you to slide your tandems to the rear. Now, he's straight out of driving school from California, and he looks at me, and I don't know how he did this. I have no idea, because there's these things called scales, and I do know sliding tandems is important to being able to make it through a weigh station.
Mm-hmm.
And so I have no idea how he got away with this, but he had no idea how to slide his tandems. Now, he just finished getting his CDL license, and he doesn't know how to slide tandems. And a guy who's never had a CDL class, which would be me, had to then explain to him how to get in his truck and how he needed to go about sliding these tandems. And I've never even driven one, but I've been around and seen enough that I knew. Here he drove this truck from California to South Carolina and didn't know how to slide tandems on. Wow. That's pathetic. So if that doesn't tell you exactly to your point, drivers are getting worse, I don't know what else will get that point across. But as you pointed out, following up on that point, don't buy into a lot of what this system has going on. Like when we look at like the things with Walmart or with Amazon, and people don't realize when they champion a lot of the policy they're wanting today, how much you're really contributing back to that system. It's kind of like what we said before. I think a lot of people need to take away from that and understand living within your means. I think this was the final point you were making there. Living within your means is something that I was taught a lot coming up, but you just don't hear many people think about today. And as you point out, the difference between capitalism and consumerism. Right now, you've got schools who teach you a lot of stuff that the Department of Education mandates they need to teach kids. Unfortunately, one of those required classes is not personal finance. And I've talked about that multiple times. So we've got an education system that's not really teaching people when they get out in the real world about managing money. And yet all the while, going back to the mainstream media, you've got a system that pushes through popularity and pop culture that consumerism, but it's not consumerism for things that actually would really matter in your life. They're not telling you why it would be a good idea to try and buy a house instead of rent. They're not telling you, save your money up and don't get into so much credit card debt. They're not telling you, instead of investing into some of these 4-year or even 2-year degrees, there's things that you can take that will get you a better job at a fraction of the price and a fraction of the time. I mentioned this in my last video with Dave. I'm actually going to be possibly going and taking a couple of classes myself before long. There was a job opening at a Michelin facility very, very, very near here. And it's like right at my house. And I've been to that site when I worked in my job. I travel around, and Michelin's one of our people that we do business with. So I've gone over there, and I've had a lot of security experience in the past, right? So I talked to the guy one day because Michelin has 2 types of security. They've got the Paul Blart Mall Cop security, and then they've got what they call the Michelin Asset Protection Officers. Ooh. And they are security, fire, and EMS all wrapped up into one. They get trained in the whole yard. So I was talking to him about it, and he asked me, he's like, well, do you have any EMT or fire? I was like, no. He said, if you go and get a EMT basic class, like EMT 1, and you get firefighter 1, you'd be a shoe in for the job. And the good thing is you can get, I don't know about the firefighter 1, but I've already started looking at the EMT basic. You can get through some of those classes in like 8 weeks time for like $2,000 or $3,000. Compare that to a 2-year degree, and then also compare that job based on the people that I've talked to. You could be looking, when they first start you out, at $20 an hour. And then over a year, 2 years time, you could be looking at somewhere between $26, $30 an hour. Compare that to what a lot of people are fighting for in the rat race, which is what we hear, like $15 an hour. I mean, and this is in South Carolina, nonetheless. If you're making $30 an hour in South Carolina, you're doing pretty well. You're doing pretty well. You can afford a lot of things. So we don't have a society that try to get more and more people to think that way, but instead, pop culture wants you to go out and buy this brand of sneaker that this, rapper threw his name on, or this, basketball player threw his name on. Go buy this sneaker. Go buy this brand of pants. Go buy this car, et cetera, et cetera. None of that stuff that, as you put it, you got more and more people who are able to spend their money in so many ways that they wouldn't be. And I think a lot of that responsibility has gone out the door. So I think that's definitely a reform we need to have too. Understand capitalism is going to pull people back towards what is your priority? What is the difference between your wants? What is the difference between your wants and your needs?
Right.
There's things you need to survive. There's things you need for life. And you should be prioritizing these things above what, TMZ or MTV or whatever push as the popular thing to have. That stuff should be coming second. And so there's definitely reform there. I think capitalism, bringing everything back to living within your means, would only help that. Whereas the idea of everything is going to be bought and paid for by the government, I think only pushes people more and more and more down the opposite direction that society's already screwed up on. So give you the final word here before we wrap up. Give us your final thoughts and let us know what you've got going on, man.
Yeah, I mean, I wasn't born with a silver spoon. I was. It sounds like we have kind of similar upbringings. My dad worked 2 jobs. My mom homeschooled us. We would get meat. We had a friend who worked at a grocery store who would save all the meat that just expired because it's still safe to eat, but it's technically not legal to sell or whatever. Bring it over to our house, and we'd eat that. We'd eat day-old bread, and then my dad got a better job later on. But I mean, we were not wealthy people growing up. No. And there's this misconception that people who are capitalists are just the upper echelon elitists. I started working when I was 16. I worked 45 hours a week during the summer, 2 hours after school every day, and on Saturdays during the school year. And then right after high school, I started working full time, got my CDL, You didn't have to get it through schooling back then. I think you do in New Hampshire now, but back then you didn't. I got my CDL, then worked for a line company, worked up the ranks. I was making over $100,000 a year by the time I was 24. So, I mean, that's the American dream, right? That's what we're taught is the American dream. Like I just, I applied myself, and I wasn't, nothing was thrust upon me. I worked for it. And I know you're that type of guy too. You're working for everything you have. There are a lot of people like that. And so, my message is really to tell people that being allowed to keep your entire paycheck and not having the government screw you over, tip the scales in the favor of big business and corporations instead of the little guy. That's what I want. I want everyone to have a fair, free shot. That's why people immigrated to this country, because that's what we used to have here. We did used to have a pretty free market economy. It's gone down the tubes. It's gotten worse and worse. So as I said earlier, I think our best bet is divorce at this point. But if we don't have to do that, if we can decentralize enough and leave each other alone enough that we don't have to break apart, I don't care. That's fine. But as long as we can learn to coexist again and stop trying to run each other's lives, that's all I want to see. But yeah, thanks for having me on, Charles. I appreciate it. I think we've known each other just about exactly a year now, I think is when you came on my channel. And it's been a fun ride. It's cool doing these shows with genuine people. You can tell a grifter right away. I'm not going to name any names, but I think we know who they are. When people just try to ride a certain wave of popularity and take it where the wind blows them. It's been good doing all this with you. As far as what I've got coming up, let's see. I got the Four Horsemen on July 11th this month, and it's going to be Clint from Liberty Lockdown is going to be the fourth guy with us. And I've got some other stuff in the works. Don't have too much laid out this month. And I'm going to be at Freedom Fest in South Dakota, the 21st through the 24th, I think, of this month. So we'll see anyone who's going to be there. So thank you, Charles.
Yeah, it's been long overdue to get you on, but I said when I started doing these interviews pretty much every week at this point, I said, you know what, I've got to get people like Reed on, because I've been on his show plenty of times. I need to bring him over here on mine. So if you haven't yet, go over, subscribe to the Naturalist Capitalist on YouTube. He uploads a lot of content, and those Four Horsemen videos are definitely good, entertaining videos. They have good conversation. Definitely go check those out. And again, go give him a follow over on Twitter at Reed Coverdale. Again, we want to thank Reed for coming on. It's been a great conversation here. If you like this video, make sure you're hitting that like button. Give us that thumbs up. It helps spread the video around. Drop the comments. It'll help with the YouTube algorithm stuff. And if you're just seeing this video and you just found this channel, make sure you subscribe here. And if you do, ring the bell so you'll get notified when we drop new content. We'll see you next time right here on the Lone Wolf Podcast.